Grab a seat.
Thank you. We're coming over here to the conversational area now.
Yes. Any questions? Show of hands and there'll be a
Quick,
roving mic
you
coming
didn't
around.
beat him.
There we go. Yeah, would you...
Second at the time. I'm Charlie from Red Spider, and I used to work with Hamish in advertising. A lot of people say advertising is diminished in power these days. Do you agree, disagree, got a point of view? You use quite a lot of advertising examples. Do you think it's still as powerful?
Well, I disagree that advertising is less powerful than it used to be. For example, Google. Google exists because of advertising. Those social media channels which started out with a land grab have rapidly moved towards an advertising model because they can't sustain themselves without it. So Facebook, Twitter, everybody else, YouTube, they're all moving towards an advertising model. And I think the reason, therefore, advertising is actually more powerful than ever is that the basic deal, which is watch my ads and you'll get free staff, free programming, free editorial, that basic consumer bargain is as powerful as it ever was. And yet we're now being given opportunities to enjoy that bargain in so many new channels and so many new platforms, so many new media. So I think it is still very, very powerful. Jim Carroll, who has just retired as chairman of BBH, fantastic. I think you worked there for a while, arguably the best agency in the world. He reminds us that the word advertising, he thinks it's derived from animum advertere, to attract the brain, attract the mind. So human beings have minds which need to be attracted. Advertising is the thing that attracts them. So I think it's a permanent. It's definitely not dead.
Going through and defining a company's culture obviously comes at a bit of an opportunity cost. So imagine when Pret had 5 employees, they might not have defined what their company culture was. At what stage do you think is the right time to go through the process of defining and engage with your employees and saying this is going to be our company culture?
Well, I think in the case of Pret, by the way, I'm a big fan of Pret, but I'm not a deep student of Pret, so I'm sure somewhere there's a case history that will tell you more about this. But my recollection is that Julian Metcalf was one of the key founders of Pret, and they in the city, it was in Westminster, I think in the city somewhere, and they noticed that a lot of sandwich shops were either very slow at making sandwiches, so you had enormous queues at a lunch hour when busy workers wanted to get in there, get a sandwich and get out again, or they were selling stale stuff which had been kept in the fridge overnight and recycled. So he came up with this idea of a sandwich shop where the sandwiches were made in a separate part of the shop and there was a stock of a supply to enable quick service and so forth and high quality. And then he put his name and his phone number on every pack, and he said, if you've got any issues, phone me. I thought that was an incredible thing to do right from the get-go. So I think successful businesses should have a brand story, a brand promise, a brand culture in their DNA. I think it is not impossible, but it's quite hard to bolt it on afterwards. That's why I mentioned Tom's. I think Tom's is a brilliant business idea. Buy a pair of glasses and I'll give another pair to a needy person in the emerging world. What a brilliant proposition! But it's in the woodwork. The same with Ben and Jerry's. They had a kind of corporate social responsibility part of their business right from their beginnings too. I'm not saying you can't bolt it on. I mean, Tesco did a pretty good job for a while in bolting on that kind of thing into its DNA. The Every Little Helps and the Beautiful Schools and so on. But you can see how fragile these things can be if they're not actually embedded in it in the way that John Lewis Partnership had. So if you're going to start your business, it is the old Dragon's Den thing. What is your brand story? What is your culture? What's in your DNA that's going to make you different?
Hamish, my name's Sandro. I spend part of my life working with banks and starting to engage more and more with culture. Is there any hope for banks? Can they do better in terms of branding themselves as organisations that no longer rip their customers off?
I think it's very, very hard for banks to do that. And so many have said they're going to, and so many have failed. And so, for example, Barclays at the moment, Jenkins has declared that he's going to make Barclays a more ethical bank, a more customer-oriented bank and so on. But unfortunately for him, the great big hairy gorillas who make so much of the money don't buy that argument. They don't want to do that. And he's then faced with a major issue, which is, do I let all those traders, all those people go away? And then what have I got left of the bank? No, presumably I'm going to lose my whole investment banking side. I'm going to lose all my deal stuff, and I'm going to be left as a retail bank on skeletally thin margins. It's very, very tough. TSB when they've been separated out from Lloyds, they have embarked on a more ethical positioning, but it's been fairly short-lived, hasn't it? Because they're being bought by a Spanish bank whose name I've forgotten. So I think it's very, very, very hard indeed. I think the people who have done best at it are ones, going back to this point about being in the DNA, is Nationwide is still a mutual organisation. Obviously mutuals can go wrong too, because the co-op was a mutual and they've had a disastrous time on their financial services side. Nationwide, because it is a mutual and therefore it's owned by its members, I think they do not a bad job of avoiding some of the more egregious unethical things. You know, the portfolio management of money is a thing that most financial institutions do. And it relies upon people being rather bored and disinterested in money, and it involves, therefore, slowly but surely managing down the interest rates while they don't notice, for example. It's offering better deals to new customers and worse deals to other customers. So these are intrinsic elements in the financial services industry, which, unless they were outlawed, so everybody was stopped prevented from doing them, someone is going to do it, and therefore it's going to make it very difficult for those that don't. Very tough. I mean, I know a bit about Barclays. I've never worked on their business, but I've looked at it for a long time, and they've been through this cycle of trying to be better and then going back to where they were before. I think it's very tough. I think the future for financial services could lie in peer-to-peer financial institutions. I think Funding Circle have done a fantastic job. They're doing really, really well with that. I think if the peer-to-peer thing could move out into a more mainstream retail financial services area, that would be very interesting indeed. Because again, that would be because the members of it are the customers of it, and so you'd have that mutually reinforcing thing of a mutual.
Hiya, Peter from Rethink Performance. I can see the benefit of brand and culture for organisations that want to get repeat business. But what about those areas that actually are either those areas where you engage with once and you don't ever go back, or those areas where actually you've got to go back to the same, you know, your school, your public sector, public sector school, yeah, where actually you've got no choice where you go. Is there a purpose in developing a brand and a culture for organisations that don't really care about their customers, or don't have to care about their customers?
So you're putting forward the idea that there are some businesses, you've given the example of a school, which has a kind of captive customer base because the people in the catchment area are the people that go to that school, and therefore I can, in effect, exploit that catchment. I guess that's one of the reasons why the current government has made a big drive into alternative schooling in exactly those areas to avoid that cultural deadlock. So I think while it may be sustainable for a period of time, and a period of time could be 10 years, could be 20 years, I'm not sure it's a sustainable strategy, because sooner or later some competition is going to come along recognising the weakness of that situation. So what would be an example in your mind of kind of a one-time only?
I couldn't really think of one, which is why I chose somewhere you have to return.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I've noticed travelling a bit is that there are certain restaurants in famous tourist resorts which clearly rely on the fact that they've got a location near the Bridge of Sighs or whatever it is, and they realise that most of the people going there are only ever going to go there once. Again, the same sort of thing. I think they got away with that for quite a long time until something called TripAdvisor came along. And then suddenly they're exposed and the reviews get posted. You know, it looks like a great idea, but avoid it like the plague. You know, that is I think the market, the free market, is quite punitive to people who exploit their customers.
And also, just to jump on to that as well, that's when you're looking at outwardly to the customers, but then there's massive amounts of research that show the benefits of creating a much better culture as well. you know, in terms of productivity, low sickness rates, and it's just creating a nicer place to be, I think is what you mentioned in your talk.
Absolutely.
So there's the outward of getting the consumerism part, but there's also the inward of building a healthy organization that is quite self-supportive as well.
I mean, going back to your example of the school, presumably that a school run on those lines tends to lose all its good teachers, and then you're into some kind of a downward spiral there.
Right.
Just to proffer an example, perhaps prisons is an example that leads to strange ways riots because of the culture not being right and people fed up, and the cost of the country is huge.
Yes, absolutely.
I also just had a question for you around storytelling, because in some of the research that we're going to be looking at, I think storytelling is a massive part about how we build culture and community.
Yes.
Any great examples that you've come across of where that narrative of the brand promise is actually much more directly correlated or supported by the narrative of the culture? So they become part of the brand promise in their stories.
I think it's an old example, but I think Anita Roddick, the founder of Body Shop, is a very good example of that, where she very early on decided that she didn't want anything to do with testing of cosmetic and toiletries products on animals. So that was a really powerful thing for her. That led to her brand positioning, that led to her product development. It totally imbued the whole culture and the brand. So I think that is a good example of that. I think that the O2 is an interesting case where the latest campaign, I know it gets mixed reviews, but I think the whole idea of be more dog is a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
And I think what I like about that is that yes, it's a customer directed thing, you know, be more open, which is kind of where the O2 brand is. But I think maybe it also should work well internally, because it's saying to the employees, you know, you too can be a bit more innovative, a bit more exploratory, and so forth.
And what about putting the employees and that culture right as part of your offering?
Well, I think it has been done by people over the years. These things tend to go in fashions. Right. B&Q had a campaign for several years where they not only do they get their employees in front of the camera, but they hired employees who had expertise in DIY, and those tended to be older people because they had that experience and they knew how to work all these bits of kit. And I think that was a very good example where you've got brand spokespersons talking for you. The famous George, I think it was George, for Halifax, the singing branch person. That was rather successful for a while also. And that came out of, they ran what would now be regarded as an internal X factor to find the people to do the performances, and he won it and he got in the ads. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're just seeing more of our clients speaking of that. You know, we want our people to be part of our USP.
Yes.
You know, and part of the sales proposition.
Yes.
So.
I think that's right. That's obviously the case with service businesses, but I think, as I've tried to suggest, I think it's also the case with brands which are possibly at one remove. And therefore, but nevertheless, they're not any longer because they're contactable online, on their website, on their online chat, through the phone, and so on. So I think the tone of voice for those employees becomes part of the brand presentation.
Great.
Yeah. I think it's quite interesting when you look at like the majority of people in internet culture, and that's usually like white males around 13 to 25 years old, and that's me included. And you kind of find that a lot of people tend to rebel against this idea of advertising. And when they hear the word advertising, they immediately think, I don't want them to try and sell me anything. And especially on the internet, you get lots of ads on websites, but there's a way for people to actually turn off the ads. And so there's no connection between people and the ads. And I suppose my question is, how do you form that connection between the brand and the people on the internet if they don't want to be advertised to?
Well, first of all, I think human beings are very good at screening out information that they're not interested in, and that includes advertising. And I think for most of the time, most people are not interested in most advertising. That's a kind of, it's very dismaying as an advertising person to sit in a tube, watch someone read a newspaper, and they turn straight past the ads, particularly if it's one of your ads. But it just seems to be the case that advertising for people who are not in the market for something is generally not very interesting at all. And that this is display advertising, so-called. So display advertising has to somehow or other seduce people into paying attention. It has to sugar the pill of the product sell somehow with news, entertainment, fantasy, comedy, celebrities, whatever it is. And that's the skill of advertising, is to try and engage people who are not in the market for whatever it is you're trying to sell. And in any environment, whether it's watching TV at home, listening to the radio, reading a newspaper, surfing the internet, I think the same thing occurs, which is people kind of screen it out. They've got kind of blinkers on and they don't see the ads. But because people know where the ads are going to appear, they can look at even quite a small screen and they know that there's going to be some advertising here and I'm not looking at that. However, when people are in the market for something, they suddenly become ad magnets. They're hunting for information. They're looking for a solution to a problem, which is they want to buy something and they want all the information they can get to actually make that a proper purchase. So suddenly, classified advertising, as it used to be called, now search advertising, suddenly becomes extremely attractive to people. People go hunting for ads. They don't put nothing in the search box, they put a word in the search box and they go looking for it. So suddenly, these tiny little ads loom large because people want to see them at that particular time. So I think even for people who might say that they never ever look at advertising, I suspect if they were actually going to be buying a laptop or a mobile phone or whatever, probably they're searching for it, probably they're looking at the ads which appear when they're there. So I think it's a complicated matter, but I don't think that younger people are any more immune or open to this than anyone else.
Have you seen the new deluxe ads for the paints?
I haven't
seen
seen it.
Oh, it's definitely worth a watch. I think in relation to that, it is about creating even more enticing brand stories.
Right.
So it isn't just about pop-up boxes and
Right.
click on because we can do ad blockers. And I think that's what you were talking about earlier, is creating that really enticing brand story, not only that employees engage with, but that we engage with, that we get part of. Yeah. Advertising is just having to be more sophisticated in storytelling. Yeah. It's not a matter of just a pop-up box anymore. It's about bringing you into a story. So. And Richard does that well.
I think the people who really do hate ads and really don't want to see ads either watch the BBC or they pay for subscription services. But it's interesting, there's some data, ThinkBox is a very good source of this. The data shows that even in Sky homes with TiVo or Sky time shift devices, because people watch more TV in those homes, the viewing goes up. And of that viewing, 85% is still live. So you lose 15%, which is on time shift, and people can skip the ads and that, clearly. But because they're watching more airtime, the maths show that actually they're more exposed to commercial messages than those who don't have that kind of technology in their houses. So it's an extraordinary thing. The programmers also have wised up to this. They're producing more and more appointment-to-view programming. People hate being told who the winner of X Factor was before they know themselves. So there suddenly becomes a great premium on watching these programs which have that kind of newsworthiness. Also, people like watching them with big screen and surround sound over there, my tablet here, and my mobile phone. And that brings them into contact with their friends and associates who are all watching the same program. They're probably betting on it and doing all that sort of stuff. So that makes the whole thing much more of an event. So the programmers are pursuing that line, which means that actually the basic deal between ads and program contact still obtains. People can just only watch subscription services, but history shows that people are not prepared to pay the money for the subscriptions in the numbers that you would need to sustain a non-advertising environment. I think has Sky got 1 million customers, maybe 2 by now, of a total population of, 50? Or adult population, 38 million, something like that. Still quite small.
My name is Veronique. I'm the Learning Director of New Entrepreneur Foundation. We are an education charity that helps develop future entrepreneur leaders for the UK. And I have a question about your theory of motivation and the Maslow, graph you showed. I'm trying to understand how this theory of motivation is changing over the years and over the different generation you have within an organization. So from an employee engagement strategy point of view, how do you balance the different, ethical, rational, and emotional element with the different generation within an organization?
Is the supposition that different generations of employees may find the desirable balance in different areas?
Yes,
okay.
That's under the assumption.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important somehow or other to get everybody aligned with the brand promise and with the brand story. And if it's the case that some of the employees, whether they be old or young, are out of line with that, if they're out of line because they simply don't understand or don't know about it, then I think that can be addressed with training. If they're out of line with it because they just don't buy it, they just don't believe it, and they don't want to do it, then I think, unfortunately, they have to be managed out of the business. Because otherwise, you can't have three different brand stories running for three different generations of people in the business, I don't think. I think that would be very, very confusing. We can't segment customers in such a way that only the unreconstructed male chauvinist pigs only talk to them who are working for the company. I'm not sure that's a viable thing. So I think you have to be quite tough about that and address the issue. I think you can be tough on the issue, not the person, but if the issue is that they don't buy the story, then I think they have to go.
Essentially, my question is, when a company needs to shift their brand promise to reflect a different brand identity, right, what are the recommended steps to take when to bring employees alongside? Well,
in respect to the Ritz-Carlton and O project, Ritz-Carlton, we first had to understand what was inside the Ritz-Carlton promise and what was some of the supporting factors. And some of the supporting factors with that particular brand was they were part of a much bigger family. So that was one property, but it was always marketed within a family of properties. They also had very clear verbiage and very clear brand guidelines, and that was quite stable. So we had to really dissect what is the DNA of the original brand, and then we had to begin to understand how the other brand was to behave, because the other brand, being O, was an independent property, and it used words like whimsical and flexible, and the two styles of service were quite unique. They both were 5-star, 5-diamond, luxury service. However, one was very much about looking at what we call, say, old style, or more traditional 5-star service. And that's very much about staying just a few steps back from a customer and giving that kind of civil service type approach. However, new fashion luxury, and what we're seeing a lot within service now in many areas, is much more about a very individualized service. Get to know the customer, build a relationship with that customer, and in doing so, you're able to build very unique experiences for them. So when we had to first then look at the different styles of service that was going to be asked of these people, because amazingly we carried 92% of the people from one brand to the other. And it wasn't easy, because both brands behave very differently. And that just really showed the intrinsic link of who we are when we sit inside a brand, when we are truly linked to it. So then certain things like from the first one, we had to then reconstruct that in a different format. It's owned by the Lewis family here in the UK, and one of the things that really hit home was for them was their story and where they came from as a family and what they had built. So therefore they were no longer, before they existed with many properties, it was actually okay to exist in a single property, but it still needed to have a very strong story and community to support it. And then we had to also then look at all the other factors of what about language? What did they need? And so by using the brand, the vision, the values, they had very strong core values that as an engagement program, we were able to then turn those into actions. Give them drip feeds of their personality. It's not about rolling in with a steamroller and saying, now you are this. It was giving them time. We spent about 8 months going back and forth, allowing them to explore the brand, allowing them to build the culture themselves. And then that's where the stories of the people became so important to me, because as a consultant sitting inside that culture, I had the fortunate ability to listen every single day. When we're not in the training room or we're not in the delivery room, I was in the restaurants, I was in the back having the chef cook me dinner in the actual kitchen, and listening to their true stories, you can incorporate that into the culture, because they are the voice on one side, but then those two worlds, they have to harmoniously work together. So to me, it's deconstructing and rebuilding, but using the things that made it strong, just giving it a different face. So.
I think that advertising can be quite helpful in these culture change programs, because in a way, if the company makes a public promise in advertising, it kind of plants a flag which the army of employees has to kind of live up to and walk towards. And so in a way, you're role modeling the desired behavior, the desired attitude out there, which then bounces off the media back onto the employees, gives them a role model as to how to behave. So for example, when BT Cellnet was relaunched as O2, the O2 advertising explained in public what this new brand was about. And you know, British Airways, going back a long way, the world's favourite airline, that was another public flag that was planted, which told the organisation that suddenly it was a different kind of an organisation to what it had been before. Now, I guess that O can't spend a ton of money on advertising in Palm.
Well, it actually spent
or maybe
a
it
lot.
did.
Yeah, it spent a lot. And I think where the connection was with that was if you allow the advertisers and the advertising to go out and let the people in the culture figure it out for themselves, it creates that silence and ghost that you were talking about. You know, it's about allowing them to understand the reasons behind the marketing campaign, to engage with why we are, what is the brand promise, because they did spend a massive amount of money having to relaunch this brand. But when the employees got to hear it firsthand why it was being done the way it was, what the purpose was, what the reason was, then they could get it. Yeah. But it wasn't up to them to figure it out. It's up for us to share them and tell them, or get them to share in the story that is being given to the customer. Yeah. And then they engaged. They were really excited by the opportunity to deliver on the brand promise. But first, our job was to tell them about the brand promise in a language they would understand, and show the reasons that supported it. And then it was exciting to be on a journey as opposed to being daunted on where are we going next. Yeah. So.
Very good.
Okay, well, shall we finish there and continue in open dialogue? Next door we have, there's a bar, we have food and drinks, all for you. So I encourage you to go and network, and you can socialize with each other, and we'll be out there and continue talking.